Why do 1 in 3 people have bunions? Is it genetic or is lifestyle to blame? In this video, we'll settle the bunion debate once and for all. How much do your genes really matter, and can simple lifestyle changes actually prevent or fix bunions? Let's get started. First up, genetics. The first is ligament laxity. This refers to joint hypermobility caused by looser ligaments, which reduces structural support around the joints. In the case of bunions, scientifically known as hallux valgus, this lack of support makes the great toe more prone to deforming. Common signs of ligament laxity include hyperextension in the hands, fingers, elbows, and knees. As you can see, both my sister and I share this genetic trait, yet surprisingly, neither of us has bunions. So clearly, there's more to the story. The next genetic factor linked to bunion formation is having wider than average feet, specifically characterized by a wide intermetatarsal angle, which is the angle between the bones of the first and second toes. There's no clear consensus in the literature on why this association exists, but there are some clues, which we'll explore later in this video. And it's not just the width of your forefoot that matters, it's the length of your toes that can also play a supposed role in bunion risk. Studies suggest that when the great toe is the longest, it becomes more susceptible to bunion development. One theory proposed by researchers is that a longer great toe experiences more pressure during push-off phase of walking. To reduce the strain, the body may attempt to shorten the lever by deviating the great toe inward. Another theory is that when the great toe extends far beyond the other toes, it doesn't have enough support from the neighboring toes, making it more likely to drift out of alignment. Now, given the lack of practical evidence supporting these theories, I find them to be a bit speculative. We found a more convincing explanation, which we'll dive deep into later in the video. The final genetic trait considered a risk factor for bunion development is a rounded metatarsal head. To illustrate how joint shape might influence bunion formation, let's compare these two x-rays side by side. Notice how the metatarsal head of the x-ray on the right is more rounded compared to the flatter shape seen on the left. This rounded joint shape allows greater lateral mobility, which may have contributed to the more severe bunion seen in that foot. In contrast, the flatter joint surface on the left restricts side-to-side movement, providing greater stability and making it less likely for the toe to shift out of alignment. So, do these genetic traits ultimately determine whether or not you'll develop a bunion? To get closer to an answer, researchers have looked at bunion rates in twins, since twins share more genetic similarities than a general population. If bunions were mostly genetic, you'd expect twins to develop them at similar rates. The first twin study we found on this topic was published in 2016 out of Korea. It reported that genetic factors accounted for roughly 47% of bunion formation. However, the authors acknowledged a major limitation. The study didn't account for lifestyle factors like footwear habits. Without adjusting for these variables, the genetic influence was likely overestimated. A year later, another research group addressed that gap by including shoe-wearing habits in their own twin study. They compared bunion prevalence in 74 identical and 56 non-identical twin pairs. The idea was simple. If bunions were mainly genetic, identical twins who share nearly all of their genes should show a much higher rate of shared bunions than non-identical twins who share about 50% of their genetics. The results? While bunions were slightly more common in identical twins, the difference wasn't statistically significant. If genetics were the dominant factor, we'd expect a much stronger pattern. And when the researchers looked at footwear habits individually, the results were even more telling. People who had worn narrow toe box shoes into their 40s had nearly 3 times the risk of developing bunions. So the authors concluded that narrow footwear, a shared environmental factor, was a stronger predictor of hallux valgus than genetics. This is great science. These authors challenged existing research by designing an even more comprehensive study to uncover deeper truths. So this inspired us to dive deeper down the rabbit hole ourselves. We looked into every possible non-hereditary factor that is tied to bunions. We found 7, all of which can be easily addressed. So let's run through them. Footwear is the most consistently cited environmental factor in bunion development. One of the earliest large-scale studies examining this link was published in 1965. It looked at 3,515 individuals from the island of St. Helena, a partial shoe-wearing community. They wanted to compare the hallux valgus angles in those who wore shoes with those who lived a barefoot lifestyle. They found that less than 2% of the barefoot population had hallux valgus, while 16% of men and 48% of women who wore shoes for 60 years or more presented with a hallux valgus angle of more than 15 degrees. Even short-term use made a noticeable difference, with women showing a mean hallux valgus angle of 5 degrees after wearing shoes for just 4 years. The authors concluded that hallux valgus is not congenital, but develops due to wearing narrow toe box shoes. But one question stood out to me. Why were women developing bunions at 3 times the rate of men? Could genetics be the reason? A 2018 study investigated this very question and concluded that the significantly higher rate of bunions in women was likely due to differences in their footwear choices. Women typically choose shoes with narrower, pointier toe boxes and higher heels, both factors known to increase bunion risk. So it's not footwear itself, but rather certain characteristics of shoes that increase bunion risk. This brings us to the first of 7 lifestyle factors contributing to great toe misalignment: pointed toe box shoes. How much do pointed toe boxes contribute to bunions? To find out, I cut open a window into the toe box of a popular sneaker to directly measure my toe alignment inside the shoe. Using a lab-grade goniometer, I found a 25-degree inward deviation of my great toe, nearly equivalent to a grade 3 bunion on the Manchester scale, a visual rating system for bunion severity. Here's a side-by-side visual comparison showing my foot's alignment inside the shoe versus its natural unrestricted shape outside. The effects of pointed toe boxes become even more pronounced for those with a longer great toe. In the pointed shoes, the longest part of the toe box is orientated over the lesser toes rather than the great toe. This mismatch between foot and shoe shape likely explains why people with a genetically longer great toe are considered more susceptible to bunions. It's hardly a coincidence that the 2 most common toe misalignments, bunions and bunionettes, occur exactly where conventional shoes taper inward. Feet with bunions literally mirror the shape of pointed shoes, clearly illustrating how footwear shape directly influences toe alignment. Fortunately, barefoot-style shoes solve this issue by shifting the tip of the shoe away from the middle of the foot towards the great toe. This design better accommodates our natural foot shapes, where the longest toe is the big toe, the second toe, or where both are roughly the same length. That's why these shoes are often referred to as foot-shaped, as they mimic the natural footprint of most feet. So perhaps the genetic trait of having a longer great toe only predisposes someone to bunions when they are paired with shoes that don't accommodate that foot shape. If you want to find the best brands making foot-shaped shoes, head over to bfs.fit and click on our barefoot shoe finder tool. Now, wearing foot-shaped barefoot shoes might not be enough to prevent bunions. Just because they are wider than traditional pointy shoes doesn't mean every model will be wide enough for your specific feet. An easy way to check if your shoe matches your foot width is to remove the insole and stand on it with your full weight. If you have a bunion, make sure to manually realign your great toe, as this comparison should be done with the toes in proper alignment. I compared my foot against 3 shoes of different widths: a traditional running shoe with a pointed toe box, a barefoot style shoe that's foot shaped but relatively narrow, and a barefoot style shoe with a wider fit. As you can see, even the second shoe, while clearly better than the pointed option, still wasn't wide enough to accommodate my toes in proper alignment. And my feet aren't even particularly wide. So for those with genetically wider feet, this may be an even bigger problem, explaining why wide feet are often linked to a higher risk of bunions. That point was confirmed in a study comparing foot shape between non-shoe wearing and shoe wearing Chinese populations. It found bunions in just 2% of lifelong barefoot individuals compared to 33% of shoe wearers of the same age, despite the barefoot group having a higher proportion of naturally wide feet. So the problem isn't the width of the foot itself, but what happens when that width is forced into shoes that can't accommodate them. If you have wider than average feet, you can visit our Barefoot Shoe Finder and use the extra wide filter. This will show you brands that specifically make shoes with wider toe boxes. Moving on. If you wear the wrong shoe size, you may be at risk of developing bunions. A 2020 study of preschool children in Japan found that wearing shoes that were one size too short increased the risk of bunions by 14%, while 2 sizes too small increased the risk by 30%. Another similar study examining shoe fit among school children found that 38.5% were wearing shoes that were too short for their feet. This group showed a much higher prevalence of bunions, leading researchers to conclude that short footwear significantly increases the risk of great toe misalignment. So clearly, the impact of poorly fitting shoes starts early. If toe restriction is what we're experiencing from infancy, it's no wonder many of us grow accustomed to poorly fitting shoes. That raises the question, how should a shoe actually fit? According to the literature, a properly fitting shoe should be at least 10 millimeters longer than your foot, with 12 millimeters being optimal. The extra space allows room for the natural splay of the toes during movement, as well as diurnal changes in foot size due to variations in temperature and blood flow. Okay, let's cover the final problematic shoe characteristic. Raised heel shoes can cause bunions. They do this by altering the body's alignment through the foot and ankle, shifting the body center of mass forward towards the toes. When combined with a narrow toe box, this forward shift forces the toes deep into the shoe's confined space, increasing pressure, particularly on the great and little toes. This effect was clearly demonstrated in a 2023 study, the first to directly examine how heel height affects toe alignment. Researchers found that even a modest 3 centimeter heel to toe drop increased hallux valgus angle, while drops over 6 centimeters worsened it significantly. Raised heels serve no functional purpose in modern footwear. They were originally invented in the 15th century to secure soldiers' feet in stirrups while horseback riding, but later became a symbol of status worn by royalty to appear taller. Unfortunately, this outdated trend still persists today. The simple solution is to avoid shoes with raised heels altogether, opting instead for flat or zero-drop footwear. This characteristic of barefoot shoes is yet another reason why I consistently recommend them over conventional shoes. Okay, let's quickly summarize the key points on shoes before moving on to the other lifestyle factors related to bunions. To prevent bunions, there are 3 shoe design features to look out for. Number 1, flat zero-drop soles. This keeps your feet level, preventing your weight from shifting forward and your toes from being pushed into the front of the shoes, where the great toe and little toe can be forced into valgus alignment. 2, foot-shaped toe boxes. This design mirrors the natural shape of the foot, allowing the toes to stay properly aligned instead of being squeezed inwards. And 3, a wide enough fit. Shoes should accommodate the unique width of your feet, preventing compression and allowing your toes to stay naturally splayed and properly aligned. These 3 footwear features actively support healthy toe alignment and help prevent bunion development. And don't forget, correct shoe sizing matters too. Shoes should have about 12 millimeters of space beyond your longest toe, allowing room for toe splay and natural daily fluctuations in foot size due to temperature and blood flow. Now on to the 3 non-shoe specific factors contributing to bunions. Weak foot arches could be the hidden reason behind your bunions. Weak flattened feet cause excessive overpronation with each step, meaning the foot collapses inward under your body weight rather than moving naturally forward over the toes. This inward collapse pushes the big toe joint into an unnatural position, gradually forming the hallux valgus shape. Imagine taking thousands of steps a day, year after year with that misalignment. It becomes easy to see how bunions develop over time. Research consistently shows a strong link between bunions and flat feet. A study published in the Journal of Foot and Ankle Surgery found that as arch height decreased, bunion angle significantly increased. Another study on adolescents found those with bunions had an 8 to 24 times higher incidence of flat feet compared to the general population. But perhaps the most striking evidence confirming this connection comes from a 2016 study of 32 women with bunions, which found that every single one of them also had flat feet. Without strong intrinsic foot muscles to maintain a healthy arch, bunion prevention becomes nearly impossible. But weak arches aren't always problems isolated at the feet. They can stem from tight ankles or weak glutes, demonstrating that your bunions may have roots far beyond your feet. Let's look at the ankles first. Tight ankles can cause bunions. Here's how. When your ankles are restricted and can't properly dorsiflex, meaning your knees can't comfortably travel forward over your toes, your body compensates by searching for mobility elsewhere. It gains that extra movement by collapsing the foot arch inward into overpronation, essentially turning the midfoot into a second ankle joint. With every step, this inward collapse puts excessive pressure on the inside edge of your foot, especially overloading the great toe. Over thousands of daily steps, this repeated stress can drive bunion development. This illustrates an important concept. When it comes to bunions, you can't just look at your toes in isolation. Often, the root cause lies higher up the kinetic chain. In functional anatomy, this principle is known as regional interdependency, meaning dysfunction in one area can create issues elsewhere in the body. In this case, tight ankles collapse the midfoot, placing excessive pressure on the big toe, forcing it into hallux valgus. And these connections don't stop at the ankles. Did you know that weak glutes can cause bunions? Your glutes play a vital role in stabilizing the pelvis and lower limbs. When they're weak or underactive, the pelvis tilts forward, leading the knees to collapse inward into a position known as knee valgus. This inward knee position causes the foot arches to flatten into overpronation, placing excessive pressure on the great toe and gradually shifting it into the classic bunion shape. You can test this yourself right now. Stand with your feet hip width apart, toes pointed straight ahead. Now intentionally allow your knees to drift inward towards each other. Notice how this immediately causes your foot arches to flatten, shifting extra weight onto your great toes and forcing them into a mild valgus angle. Next, place your hands on your glutes and squeeze them firmly to activate the muscles. Pay attention to what happens. Your knees move back out, your arches lift, and your big toes return to a normal neutral aligned position. This simple test demonstrates the powerful downstream effect that strong active glutes have in maintaining proper foot alignment and preventing bunions. So as you can see, the poor toes are affected by weak foot arches, tight ankles, and inactive glutes. These musculoskeletal issues also help explain why bunions often develop in one foot rather than both. If bunions were mostly genetic, we'd expect to always see them in both feet because our genetics don't differ between feet. But we can develop musculoskeletal asymmetries due to past injuries or movement habits, where mobility and strength are more limited on one side of the body than the other. Do you see the connection now? That's why to effectively address your bunions, you need a full body functional assessment to identify which areas are restricted or dysfunctional. In our academy, we use 10 functional tests to help get a complete picture of your body. Based on your scores, we create a personalized plan to target your specific problem areas, using our 15-minute follow-along workout and a catalog of nearly 100 proprietary exercises with tutorials. In this way, no matter where the root causes of your bunions lie, we'll be able to help you find and address them. Now that we've explored both sides of the argument, here's our conclusion. Genetics may influence bunion formation, but blaming genetics alone without addressing lifestyle is like someone with fair skin getting badly sunburned over and over, saying, "It's just my genetics, what can I do?" That mindset ignores the simple preventative actions available, like wearing protective clothing or avoiding too much midday sun. Similarly, if you have ligament laxity, wide feet, or a long great toe with a rounded metatarsal head, you might be more susceptible to developing bunions. But just like the fair-skinned person can reduce their risk by taking precautions, you can do the same by choosing footwear that respects your foot structure and by improving your mobility and strength. This isn't a radical take on misalignment. We already apply this kind of reasoning to other areas of the body. Take a forward head posture with rounded shoulders, commonly referred to as text or technique. As the name suggests, this misalignment is widely recognized as the result of prolonged sitting over screens, leading to a weak and stiff thoracic spine and tight chest muscles. You rarely hear anyone blaming that on genetics. If misalignment in the neck and shoulders can be improved through targeted habits and corrective exercise, there's no reason the same can't apply to the alignment in our feet. So yes, your genes may set the stage, but your lifestyle writes the script. As I mentioned earlier, I have mild ligament laxity and a longer great toe, 2 of the 4 genetic factors. But I don't have bunions because I became aware of the risk and took the necessary precautions. Recognizing genetic predispositions should motivate proactive habits, not justify complacency. And when we focus on what we can control, it gives us agency to move forward and make progress instead of feeling stuck with our situation. I much prefer that proactive, positive mindset. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.